So there is a black market for tokens in China. I think we're all familiar with the you wouldn't steal a car that went around for anti-piracy. I gotta be honest, I would download a car. To add on to that, I would absolutely download a token. And so that led me down the path of investigating these Chinese black markets. And it's not just about distillation. We always hear about distillation, but there's also some middlemen additions that really impact the cost there. Describes the one fish, 3 meals strategy. The user prompts an API. Their prompt goes into this API and out goes to Claude or OpenAI or whatever company. And so meal 1 is achieved through bulk account registrations. Every new subscription to Anthropic gets a small free token amount. Typically it's about $5. Part of their strategies here is to mass create these accounts, have a little bit of allocation for each user, effectively have an army of little $5 subscription warriors that can be deployed at any second. Prompt comes through, they send it to one of their free accounts, out comes the output. Now obviously that's limited. In some cases you might run through that in one prompt, and so they do have more strategies than just that. Educational arbitrage, there are discounts you get for education accounts. They manage to get their hands on these accounts through whatever means. That gives them that benefit. Another area they benefit from is in meal 2, which they describe here as swapping models and inflating the token cost. So the way this might work is you send a prompt to their API and they can detect the type of prompt it is. And so if you send a prompt that might be easy to handle, deemed by their API, they'll send you to the lower cost model. And if it's a more challenging task, they might route you directly to Claude or OpenAI. It does come at some risks. The user sends it in and it ends up not working out well. You either risk the user not wanting to use it anymore, or they have to come back and send another prompt. Probably a lot of complex logic that goes into this. You have to realize they have a history of prompts that are sent, a way to deem what is the most effective path for that. A user would select Opus 4.7, but the proxy can silently route Sonic, Haiku, or even in the worst case, GLM or Quen. So pretty much outright scamming the user to make them think they're going to one model versus the other. In a lot of cases, the user probably won't know. The average user thinks they need Opus 4.7, 4.8, or 5 for everything they do, but in reality, they probably could get away with a small RAM model. And it goes on to say how hard it is to prove this part. For complex tasks, it's pretty obvious. When you send a prompt in for something and it just completely messes up, I think you can kind of start to tell, hey, maybe this is using a really bad model. But for really simple tasks, you're not going to notice this stuff, right? And so while to the end user, it looks like they're paying for a top-of-the-line model, they're really just paying for a lower cost one, and then they can pocket the difference there. And so meal 1 and meal 2 are really good strategies for this. However, this isn't really where the big money comes from. The big money comes from meal 3, which is selling the user data. I think we see a lot of posts online about the risks of using Chinese models. They're stealing our data, right? We see this all the time. Unfortunately, it pretty much is true. So meal 3, they mentioned the logs are the product in this case. So the prompt that you send in, and then also the output of that prompt is directly beneficial to them. Because you have to realize they're not just getting the prompt here, they're also getting the traces, they're getting the output, they're getting the tool calls, etc. And companies, especially in China, are willing to pay for this stuff. If you go on Hugging Face, you'll even find people are already listing Fable 5 traces. And while this one's for free, you can bet your bottom dollar there's a better quality data set available somewhere and people are just charging for it. So as the article mentions, the first 2 meals are useful for providing cheaper tokens, but to really make the prices really low, and so we're talking as much as 10% of the cost or even 5% of the cost, that is coming from this third meal here. The labs are always trying to combat this. Anthropic has posted articles such as this one where they're discussing their preventions of distillation attacks. And there's a lot of rumors going around, which are most certainly true, that the Kimi K3 model has distilled Fable for its development. And it kind of becomes a question of ethical, where what's worse, stealing from users or stealing from the users that stole from the users? Or this question of which one's worse. I think most people are on the side of stealing from the people that stole. And so people that find this information out about Kimi K3 distilling from Fable, they don't really see it as a negative thing. And I think I'm in the same boat. At the end of the day, our data's stolen from anyway. And so I see this as pretty much just one and of the same. So if you're not familiar with distillation, Anthropic describes it as training a less capable model on the outputs of a stronger one. So Kimi K3, as you'll see from benchmarks, it does beat Fable 5 in some cases, but for the most part, Fable 5 is a better model. But when you realize Kimi K3 is I think it's anywhere from 2 to 3 times cheaper, depending on what you're doing, at least from the API cost. And so they're able to train these models through distillation at a very, very cheap price compared to what it would cost normally. And really this technique here that they're using, especially through meal 1 and in meal 2, really this helps them get this data quicker. Because the hard parts of distillation are in the limitations. API limits, token limits, etc. This part is basically nullified when you have 1 million users hitting your API and providing this directly to you. And so this is a big benefit as far as getting the data for distillation goes. So while Communicate3 and these types of models are a lot cheaper, I think the question really becomes, while the tokens are cheaper, is it really cheaper in the end? You have to realize that although the tokens are cheaper, their subscriptions effectively make it like Walmart. It ends up being a lot cheaper for the end user to just subscribe to these subscription services, right? This $100 tier that you're seeing here actually gets you a lot more than that compared to API cost. And I think it really depends on how much you use your subscription. Let's say you have the $20 a month subscription. A lot of people are actually not using this full $20 a month. I think a lot of us watching would use all of it. Me personally, I have 2 of these. And sometimes there have been months where I just buy the $200 a month subscription. I've done this before, but lately I haven't been programming as much. But so for me, when I pay for these, I'm using everything. But if you're somebody who's not as much of a power user, a lot of it is left on the table with this one. And so the question of, is it really cheaper in the end depends on your usage. Communicate3 actually has a subscription as well. They give them very Italian names, but personally, I haven't really tested their subscription service. I found this post on Reddit that gives a feedback on their subscription. I see some people saying it's good, but I also see a lot of people saying otherwise. This guy mentions that he paid for the $39 plan and hit the 5-hour window on just 3 prompts. This guy mentioned as well, right? He bought the $39 subscription and it felt equivalent to about 60% of what the $100 subscription gives you, which is actually pretty good value. This guy's mentioning Codex's subscription plan is pretty insane, so it's hard to beat. But for the most part, it seems like the plan is not a great value overall. And so while a lot of people are touting that Communicate3 is cheap and a better option, in reality, if you're a power user, I don't think it ends up being that way. And this Chinese API black market, I think it definitely benefits the end user at the end of the day because you're still getting a 90% reduction in token cost. But you have to ask yourself what you're losing in this, right? Do you like the idea that they're being rerouted to a cheaper model or having your data sold? I guess that depends on the user. For some people, this is their only option. You really can't use Claude or North American models in other regions. And so in some cases, these APIs are just used because they have to use them. But I think for the average American user, especially power users, it really doesn't benefit them to use these cheaper options. Even seeing Communicate3 isn't that good of a value. And so the power user today, especially, is really better off with the Codex. I think Claude overall ends up a pretty good value still. And let me be clear, that's for these subscriptions. For the API, not so much. But I think it's worth mentioning we're very early on, really, in this market. I think as time goes on, you'll see more and more companies like this pop up. And it won't just be Chinese. I think you'll also see this happening in North America. These things are actually very beneficial to companies, and they can offer at a much reduced cost. In particular, this part. If you can convince people that they're using the latest Claude model and having some articulated harness or in-between that's really well developed, this could be the difference maker. And the article mentions that several Chinese developers have revealed that the markup portion is really just customer acquisition, and it's really the log harvest that's the actual margin maker. If we're looking at these 3 options here, these 2 seem very dishonest and potentially even illegal in some cases. I don't know, definitely some terms of conditions issues, right? But I think this part here is really hard to argue against. And so I think we're going to see more companies prop up just for this part here, where they offer you Claude and Codex costs for cheaper, then they're able to sell this data over to, say, somebody in China. And I guess the question becomes is, do you find this worth it? Do you find it worth it to pay a cheaper amount knowing that this data is going to someone for distillation? As we discussed before, we're kind of already getting robbed of some of this stuff anyway, of whether or not you care about this. You also have to realize Meal 2, while dishonest, is actually pretty smart. Because, as I mentioned, a lot of users are not going to be able to tell the difference. And I think even experienced users in some cases won't be able to tell this difference. And you have to ask yourself, is there value in it, even as a non-manipulative thing? A lot of agents have an auto mode where it kind of detects the best model to use for that task. But I can envision a world where a company has spent a ton of time on their own version of auto that's actually better than what the lab is providing and maybe allows them to achieve this at a really low cost anyway. Right, especially with all the data they're able to get from the users to verify which one ends up being better. So that's an interesting idea. I would absolutely download a token. And so I actually kind of am rooting for this a little bit. I think there's some dishonesty, and especially in Meal 1 and Meal 3. I think Meal 2 is arguably not that malicious if it's done effectively. And I would say with Meal 3, it comes down to what you're working on. I don't think I value privacy in the data as much as maybe the next guy. But I can tell you right now, if you told me I could get a 90% reduction in token cost, you can have everything you want. Give me the 90% reduction.